I stood outside Carter's room for a long time before I found the strength to reach for the door. Downstairs, it sounded like a small army was going about its day. The voice of John Jr. had joined the chorus in earnest, and the house was suddenly full of noisy ghosts. It was like listening to a half a dozen VHS tapes at once from all periods of someone's life. There was the eager squeal of kids running downstairs for Christmas morning, the general laughter as games and ideas were exchanged, music, song, arguments, fights, forgiveness, the sound of a large family coming together and moving within the same waters. I'd always wanted that, always wanted a big family and an active support system. I had one brother. He had died a few years ago in a car crash. Our parents had always been career-minded, things like children being almost an afterthought, and when Gabriel died, it had felt like I was alone in the world. I suppose I'd learned well from my parents. I'd never sought out a wife, never even thought about kids. Now I was here, planning to open a place for families so I could live vicariously through them. Was I any better than them? I opened the door before I could think better of it. Carter's room would have nearly qualified as a second library. There were floor-to-ceiling bookshelves, complete with ladders that rolled on casters between them. He had so many books I'd never even heard of, and tossed casually around the room were comfortable little things to sit on and read. Pressed against one tall shelf was a small Spartan bed that looked barely wide enough for one. He had no posters, no models hanging from the ceiling, nothing to signify his interests except... No, that wasn't quite true. Carter didn't need posters or models or anything a normal person might use to show others their great loves. The books were his love, his life, and through them he had lived 1,000 lifetimes and loved 1,000 loves. The only space in the room not dominated by huge shelves was a desk by the window, and atop it was a battered old typewriter and a huge stack of paper. The paper was yellow, curled at the edges some, but still serviceable. I hated to tear down the bookcases, but I was saved the trouble. No sooner had I set my crowbar behind the first shelf than I heard a plaintive, almost pleading ding from the typewriter. I looked up to see a fresh sheet of paper in the guts of the thing, the keys clicking away as it filled the space with words. It dinged again as it finished, spitting out the page as something fed a fresh one into the machine. It was already typing away before the page hit the floor next to my foot, and I picked it up to find the start of what I had been looking for. To whom it may concern, I hope I've caught your attention before you've begun destroying my sanctuary. It's funny, I had you wreck the spaces my siblings loved so much, but when my turn came, I proved just how much of a coward I am. In the end, I couldn't stand to see my own place of refuge torn to pieces, and if that makes me weak, then I suppose I am. If you've come this far, then I suppose you're hoping for an end to this story. If those are your reasons, then I may have to disappoint you. If you were hoping for some kind of closure, then your disappointment will be complete indeed. If you've come to learn how my story ends, then you may get what you want, though it may not be what you came to find. I looked at the desk and found 3 to 4 sheets of paper sitting in a pile. I put the sheet I had back in the stack and grabbed the top sheet. You read the final tale from Carter Hargrave, youngest of the Hargrave children, and the last of the Hargrave line. I was the one who ended that family line. It was I who brought the gifted family Hargrave to its knees. I was no accident. All of our births were acts of planning by our parents, and I came forth into the world with a story to tell. I remember everything that ever happened, from the moment I came into this world until I stepped over my brother's body and went to meet my patron. I was gifted, or cursed, with perfect memory, and it has aided me greatly in my pursuits of the written word. I wrote stories in my crib about my bears or my balls and the adventures they undertook as they crossed the landscape of my blanket. Babies do not write like people do. Their stories are transient, less cohesive, and I did not yet understand things like walking or the world at large. Sometimes Mother would sit me in the swing and let me look outside, and I would see the trees and the grass, the flowers in the garden, even the car as it hunkered before the house like a faithful dog. I remember all these things, but they don't mean much. What stands out are my siblings and the things we used to do. John Jr. and I have never seen eye to eye. How could we? By the time I could speak, he was nearly out of elementary school. When I began writing in earnest, he was going into high school. The gulf that divided us was vast, and he made no effort to build a bridge. Marguerite, however, was someone I often thought of as a second mother. Marguerite, who, whether out of obligation or desire, often joined in our games. There were evenings she would help us with projects, put on plays that I had written and she had made the backgrounds for, accompanied by Jasper on his guitar, judged our games of charades and Pictionary, and so many other things. Evenings in the Hargrave house were far from boring, and certainly never quiet. I remember when I was 8, we performed Shakespeare for Mother and Father in the living room. John Jr. sat amongst them like he was too good to come and perform with us. Not until we performed The Hound of the Baskervilles and let him play Holmes himself. Jasper, Persephone, Venus, even Marguerite put on a fine performance of A Midsummer Night's Dream, and as we took a bow, I remember wishing these days would never end. I missed the times I would bask in the laughter and the adulation of my siblings, my friends. But what's the line from Frost? Nothing gold may stay. Such was the case for us as well. John Jr. left first, off to pursue his desires to solve cases and catch the unjust. Then Marguerite, as she left to paint and create. Soon it was just Venus, Jasper, Persephone, and I, drinking in the garden by night and wondering who would be the next to go. Venus intended to make it her, but Jasper beat her by a month when he left in the night to chase his musical endeavors. Venus left not long after, and it was just Persephone, Mother, Father, and I. Persephone saw no reason to go for longer than a few days, a trip here or a lecture here, and I saw no reason to leave either. I had been published 3 times before I left high school, and as I settled into my life as an accomplished writer, I reveled in the written word. The more I reveled, though, the harder it became. The masses do not want innovation. The masses do not want to read untested ground. The masses want clean, comfortable stories, a treading of that same ground, and I soon grew bored with the desires of the public. They do not like when I turn from comfortable ground, and when I walk the same paths again and again, they often compare it unfavorably to my other works. My siblings were innovators. They were changing the world, and I was doing little but reading the same written word again and again, like an animal in a circus. I suppose I was jealous of them in many ways, and that was how my spiral began. I fell into drinking fairly easily. Alcohol is the crutch of many great writers. Twain, Dostoevsky, even Frost, some say. Father's liquor cabinet had never been dry a day in my life, and I was soon banging away at my work while drunk as a lord. I never indulged in anything harder, though I knew Jasper had access to it. I would drink, but I never wanted to lose control of myself completely. My work was important, and I had to keep writing, or what was it all for? The writing was a mania in me, a need to squeeze as much as I could from it, and I sometimes wondered if it was the same with my siblings. Persephone described it as a buildup of knowledge, and she said it sometimes hurt if she tried to go too long without working. Jasper said it was more like a knowing that if he didn't sharpen his craft it would begin to dull, and Venus said it was an anxious feeling, that she would be forgotten. It sometimes kept her up at night. I never asked the other two. Perhaps I should have. Regardless, you know how it goes from here. It had been nearly a decade since Venus had left when Father died. Mother had gone the year before, and her passing had hit us all deeply. Father was the breadwinner, the one who kept us all fed and clothed and in the finest schools, but Mother was the heart of the family. Mother had kept the house, she kept us, and she was often a part of our games as well. We came to Father with matters financial and professional, but we went to Mother with boo-boos and broken hearts and family squabbles. The mood around the house was far sadder than it was for Father's funeral, and it was like something had died in us all. We didn't stay as close as we had been, the ones of us who were, and it felt like we had lost something irreplaceable. When the man arrived during Father's wake, it was the beginning of the end for us. I had recently written a bestseller, something I hadn't done in years, and I was set to go on a book tour when I got the news. Father had passed in his sleep. He was very old, and I told my agent to put it off until June so I could mourn. Honestly, I just wanted to see which of us would get the house. John Jr., of course, would inherit most of the estates, but I didn't want to come back from my tour and find that I suddenly had nowhere to live. And so the man in the tall hat intruded on our grief and told us how our abilities would diminish if we didn't choose someone to stay. Father had been the anchor, something he had never told us about, and now there would need to be another. Thus began the debates. John Jr. had his life in Washington. Marguerite had her studio in New York. Jasper and Venus had the world. Persephone had the Amazon. And I had my book tour. I could no more stay than any of them, though they seemed to think I was the obvious choice. "You live here full-time already," John said. "Your life is already here," Jasper chimed in. "You have no desire to leave," Marguerite said. "Where else would you go?" Venus stated bluntly. I looked to Persephone, the closest of my siblings, but she said nothing. That hurt the most. Why should it be me, though? Did I not have my own life? Did I not have my own dreams? Why were my goals so much easier to achieve from home than theirs? It was unfair to hang this on me, and when I told them so, they looked at me as if I were the most selfish person alive. "Then there is no anchor," John Jr. stated. "If none will stay, then it's over." I was shocked. Just like that. They would throw it all away for their own pursuits. They would turn their backs on our legacy for what? Mediocrity? I left to be by myself as they tore at each other like a pack of jackals. Gone were the smiling faces that had once decorated the living room. The knives had come out, and we were a pack of strangers. Perhaps the smiles had been masks this whole time, and they had really been strangers all along. We would lose our gifts, and they seemed content with that. Not me, though. I would not stoop to mediocrity. Perhaps that was why he chose me. He came to me in the night and told me that if I was to keep my gift, if I was to have my heart's desire, I would have to keep them here instead. They would be the anchor, all of them, and I would have what I wanted. So, I did his bidding, but I was as blind as the rest of them. Perhaps John Jr. would have seen through his charade, but not I. After I was done burning the things they prized the most, I stepped over my eldest brother as he lay at the foot of the stairs. I practically skipped up those stairs, to tell my patron what I had accomplished. I went to him, my desire in mind, and he called me his avatar and asked what my fondest wish would be. I told him I wanted to be the greatest writer of my age. I wanted to write a tale that would stand the test of time, a story so sensational that no one would ever see its like again. And he gave me exactly what I wanted. Now this home is my prison too, my last great work. He wrote my story on the walls, beneath all the frou-frou we had hung up to hide the bare and ugly truth, and he wrote it large for all to see. Here lies Carter Hargrave, the fool of the Hargrave clan and its biographer. I wrote this story with my actions, with my haste, and now I have eternity to regret. I put down the last page, the typewriter having long ago stopped tapping away. I'm sitting on the bed in Carter's room, still not sure what to make of it. What do I do with this information? What do I do with this house? The more I learn about this place, the less I want to be here, let alone invite people here. If the house could trap the Hargraves here, how many more might it snare? How many more are already here? And even as I sit, there is a voice that whispers to me, "You can be the last Hargrave. It doesn't matter what you were born as. You can be Hargrave. Take up the mantle, open the house, fill it with more children to continue my legacy. Let me give my gifts to you." It's beginning to sound pretty good, but I know the cup he offers is full of poison. As I rose from the bed, I knew what I had to do. I didn't knock down his bookshelves, but I did destroy Carter's sanctuary, as he had the others. The fire licked from the lighter to the paper on his desk, and the flames chewed at the old books, devouring them and spreading across the dry old house. I didn't look back. I knew the house was just waiting to be devoured. It had only needed a nudge. I walked down the stairs, seeing the ghosts below begin to dissolve into shimmers of agitated light. They were free now, even Carter, and he could go and do what he wanted. The adults, the 6 that stood watching as I left, seemed relieved. They were holding hands, watching me with a mixture of relief and finality, and the one on the end mouthed a quick thank you before they all dissolved into nothing. I left everything behind as I walked out onto the lawn, the heat like a furnace behind me. That was where the fire trucks found me an hour later. By then it was too late. The house was gone, little more than a pile of kindling and ashes. I told them I had gotten out before the fire got too bad, not mentioning that I had started it. The insurance paid me out for what I had spent on it, and I decided to look for something a little newer for my bed and breakfast. Perhaps something with a few less ghosts. You're still here. Thanks so much for joining us for tonight's spooky tale. If you'd like a little bit more spooky in your life, why not click on one of the videos that appears at the end of our story, or maybe head on over to one of our playlists where you can get your fill of spooky content. If you like your spooky a little more tactile, I've got a new book that's come out. If you'd like your own copy, there's a link below in the description where you can get your own copy of my spooky book. If you like what you see here on the channel and think you might like to support in a more monetized way, then why not come over to Patreon or become a member on YouTube? Speaking of, let's go ahead and thank our members now. Thanks to Civ Garstad, Unicorn Hollow, and Army Dude for being our Spooky Ghost contributors. Thanks to Janet, Lee Kendall, Saikat, Ronda J, Sue Casper, and Valinator for being our Spooky Skeleton contributors. And thanks to Oh Snap, Hi Stacy, Winter, Xaronan, Stephanie Carrington, Tyler Parker, Cinnamon Fox, Grim Reaper, TomBoiTopUwU, and Queen Sheebah for being our Ghostly Reader tier contributors. And a big thanks to Scott Donahue for being our Ghostly Writer tier contributor. Thanks, everyone. We just couldn't do the show without you. If you'd like to support the channel, then come on down to Patreon or become a member on YouTube. Spooky Skeleton tier contributors, that's our $5 tier, get their spooky 12 hours early at 8:30 a.m. as opposed to 8:30 p.m. My time, of course. And while Ghostly Reading is only a tier that's available on Patreon, you get a signed copy of my book anytime I write one on your doorstep in, hopefully, a timely manner. If you'd like a book, we have many on Amazon. I've got links below if you'd like to follow those. Should get you to my page so you can buy any one of my 8 books I believe we're up to now. I'm sure they'd look really nice on your shelf, and I'll sign them for you if you can find me out in the wild. And as always, thanks for stopping by. Dr. Plague, signing off. Have a wonderful evening.